Welcome back to my channel. I'm Amy from The Fuel Homestead and thefuelhomestead.com, and I am also the founder of Homesteaders of America. You can find us at homesteadersofamerica.com. And recently I asked a question on our social media, and the question was, what kind of topics and speakers would you like to see at future conferences, at future events? And one of the intriguing things that I found was that a lot of people requested real information. And by real, they're meaning they want to hear more about the reality of homesteading. They want to hear more about the hardships of homesteading. They want to be talked to in a way where they can learn from somebody who can bring awareness. Like, hey, maybe you shouldn't jump into doing this, or hey, maybe you should second guess that before you make that decision. And so I thought, we don't have to wait for the conference to start talking about some of these hard topics. And so I thought I would start doing some on my channel, my personal channel, instead of the Homesteaders of America channel, because I have more followers here and more people know me here, and it's going to be on a more personal level. So personal experiences and different scenarios that we've been in or that I've grown up in, being around farm life my whole life. And so we're going to start a Homestead Chat series, and it'll be a constant ongoing series. It's not going to be like a every week thing, but just as things kind of come up, or as I think of things, or as situations arise, and it's just going to be a sit down chat. And so you can turn it on and flip it on fast speed and watch it while you clean or while you're doing chores or whatever. But I'm excited about this series because I feel like it's really necessary. We really need to have real talk. Like, homesteading is fun and homesteading is awesome, and I am not one to dwell on the hardships of homesteading, because I believe that homesteading is a lifestyle and it's a passion, and if you dwell on the hardships of it, then that's all you're dwelling on at all, and it becomes not even fun, and it becomes just boring and stressful. And so I'm not that type of person, but I do believe in being honest and being real and offering information and education from a real standpoint. And that's helpful too, because in the long run I would have wished that somebody would have said, hey, don't do this, try this, or had questioned, are you really ready for that, in a non-snarky way. So we're going to get started with our very first Homestead Chat. There will be a playlist if you're starting at this #1 video, and it might be the #1 video for a really long time, but I will make a Homestead Chat playlist so you can go back and look at all the topics. But today, this is a topic that a friend of mine and I have been talking about for a little while, and I said, you know what, I think I'm going to go ahead and do a video on it because I feel like it's really important. What prompted this topic that I'm going to tell you in just a second is we recently, about, 5 or 6 weeks ago, we had taken on a baby calf from my grandfather's farm. I will link a video up in the cards and down in the description so you can go watch that. But my grandfather has always raised Angus cattle, black Angus cattle. And I think for a while there he had some Herefords, but mostly just black Angus cattle. He's always had cows, always had a farm, grew up around them, wonderful experience. But we've never actually had one on our property ourselves. And so we recently took one on when he had a bottle baby, with the understanding that after about a month, the baby would go back to a farm, to his farm, or to another home. We would just raise it to get it to the point where it was ready to go somewhere else. Well, unfortunately, in his situation, things happened, and he's older. He's well into his 80s. He's not sick, but he does have cancer, and so he's just decided to kind of get rid of all of his cows. So it didn't work out as we had planned, but thankfully we did find a home for her, which is a totally another story for a totally different day. But this is what prompted this topic, because I had just so many things going through my head, and things that I didn't think through. Being pregnant, and then just wanting to take care of the calf, and wanting to have it on the property, and we only live on a half acre. There's so many things. So the topic today is livestock. But the question is, are you really ready for livestock? Okay. So I have a list of things that I want to go down, but let me just kind of introduce this theme of today's Homestead Chat. Homesteaders, anybody, not even just homesteaders, but anybody who wants to do something a lot of times we jump into it very, very quickly without really thinking about different scenarios that could happen, health issues. We don't educate ourselves on the tools that we need, or our property layout, or our pasture type. And we're just like, hey, we've never done this before, but we'll go get livestock, right? And sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have to jump in. Sometimes you just have to do it. And I will be the first one to say that. I'm not going to discourage you, but I do want to give you some tips and tricks from doing this for a few years and also growing up around it. So we have different levels of livestock, okay? We have these small livestock like rabbits and chickens and ducks and quail and turkeys. Poultry are like the gateway animal to homesteading, right? They're extremely easy to take care of. And if something goes wrong, it's generally easy to clean up after, or fix, or amend. The one thing I would say with poultry is that you really have to make sure your setup is great so they're not flying out constantly. You know, poultry are prey animals, and so predators will most certainly get to them. So just making sure your setup is ready completely for poultry. But surpassing that, your poultry is pretty simple. Now, I'm going to include poultry in the livestock, you know, theme that we're going through, because it is important to understand poultry and how they work, and your setup, and again, your pasture and your tools and all that stuff. But when I'm talking about livestock, I do want you to keep in mind poultry, but I want you to also think about large livestock. So once we surpass the small livestock stage, you know, it seems like anybody can raise poultry, right? Or anybody can raise rabbits, or anybody can raise small livestock. It's very easy. It's even easy enough for our kids to do it, right? But when we're talking about adding a black Angus cow for beef, or a dairy cow, or goats, or llamas, or emus, or, you know, anything that's larger than us in many ways, it's like we kind of lose some common sense. And I say that in the nicest way, but it's true. And I can say that because I've been there too. We compare it to our poultry experience. We compare it to our chicken experience. Well, if I can take care of chickens, then I can take care of cow. Not necessarily true. So here are some things, livestock in general, but definitely keep in mind your large livestock. So the first thing to know, if you're ready, is your setup. Now, I wrote about this in my brand new chicken book that just came out. When we first got chickens, we didn't have a chicken coop. Don't do that. But I'm finding that a lot of people have done that, and I think it's hilarious. It's funny to go back and look at it now, but while we were doing it, it wasn't hilarious. We had chickens before we had a chicken coop. Our setup was horrible. We had this little fence with a tarp over it that made this covering, and it was like, what are we doing? We just jumped into it and got it done. And it makes for a great story, and it all worked out. But your setup for your livestock is your very first priority. So do you have a barn? Do you have a run-in shed? Is it feasible? Is it efficient? Is it leaking? Is there mold? Is there enough bedding? Do you have bedding? Have you put bedding in there? Is it a mud pit? Does it have to be cleaned out? If you don't have a setup, what's your timeline for building a setup before you get the livestock? And so you really have to make sure that you've got a solid setup. You got to think of everything. The housing, when it rains, when it snows, is the roof going to collapse? You know, think about these things. Think about a whole year of owning this livestock, and have that all prepared before you have that livestock on your property. So for us, with the calf that we got, we weren't prepared at all. It was a very off the whim thing, and it had to be. And I want to stress that, because there are some situations where you just get thrown into it. The calf was one of those situations, and we dealt with it. The calf was born. It was already 3 days old. My grandfather didn't want to take care of it anymore. He didn't have a caretaker for it. And in order to help him out and get that stress off of him, we decided to take it, and we made it work. We came home, we took an hour or two out of our time. We made a very temporary housing setup, which worked great, kept her out of the wind, kept her out of the rain, kept her out of storms, was free from any predator activity, and so we made it work. But if we're talking about planning ahead, which is what we should always do, Just know though that those situations could arise. But when we're talking about planning a long-term permanent home for your livestock, your setup is your number one thing you need to think about. The second thing is fencing. Again, you know, fencing isn't necessarily always an issue with smaller livestock, but it is an issue for larger livestock. And I feel like this is an important issue that is not talked about a lot. And at the 2019 conference, Homesteaders of America conference, we are talking about fencing extensively because I feel like it's extremely important. My whole life, I have seen animals die because of improper fencing techniques or bad fencing techniques or just lack of attention to detail. So, you know, when you have cattle or goats, you're constantly mending fences. It seems like you're constantly mending them. Cattle are big, even the babies, don't underestimate them. They will lean up against a fence, they will break a barbed wire, they will break a fence post, they will, you know, and that happens. And that's something you have to be prepared for as a homesteader. It's not as simple as I'm going to get some cows and put them in a field with a fence and be done with it. You've got to go check fence rows. If not every day, then at least a couple of times a week. You know, there are just things. Is a fence line that's already in place too close to a hillside? Because what happens when a cow falls down a hill? You know, cows aren't like chickens. They can't fly. And cows aren't like goats. They can't jump up really quickly. They're heavy animals. You know, it could be devastating. You could lose one of your animals. What happens if, you know, your fence line is close to plants that are toxic to goats or toxic to your cattle, and you haven't cleaned that fencer out before you have placed that livestock on your homestead? And we'll get to more of that digestive issue in a second. But these are things you have to think about. It's not as simple as, okay, I've got a fence, or okay, I'm going to put a fence up and it's going to be all fine and dandy. Do you have the right kind of fencing? Do you know how many kinds of fencing there are? There's a lot of types of fencing, and fencing's not cheap. And we'll talk about that in a second as well. And so making sure your structure and your setup and your fencing is all in place properly is really important. The one thing that I enjoy about Justin Rhodes and his YouTube channel is when he's going around checking his electric fencing, and this was in a recent video of his too, you have to check it frequently. There was a point where there was a limb down on his electric fence. Well, if he would have just not checked the fence before he put his cattle in there, his cows would have gotten out. And they would have been 2 miles down the road into the neighbor's flower bushes or something, you know. And then you have a totally other bad issue. So checking your setup, checking your fencing, making sure on a regular basis that it's ready to go. Okay, if you can do that, you're on your way to being ready for livestock. The third thing that I feel like people really overlook quite often, and I see this consistently locally especially, but I see it on YouTube as well, and these things can be prevented. And it's so horrible because as homesteaders we jump into it, and the fun part about homesteading is we're homesteading because we are generations removed from the knowledge that we're striving to get, right? We're striving for a back to the land movement. We're striving for a back to our roots, getting there, but we're not there yet, okay? And so we don't have this knowledge. Lots of us didn't, you know, many didn't grow up on a farm or didn't grow up around farming, and so we're struggling, you know, and we don't know these things. The most common issue I see, especially in ruminant animals, which are like cows, they have a very complex digestive tract. They have a very much different than any other animal you'll find, is the type of pasture that you put them on. So when you're going out here and you're buying land, or you have a pasture that you're ready to put livestock on, it doesn't really matter much with poultry, but it definitely matters with your ruminant animals. What type of pasture is it? What type of grass is on it? Did you know that there are certain types of grasses that are toxic to cattle, especially if they haven't been accustomed to it, growing up on it? Did you know that there's certain type of plants in your field that can prick your animals, your livestock, and give them infections? A lot of people don't look at their pasture, and they could totally avoid a lot of the issues that come up if they were to just know and comprehend what their pasture is. And so I encourage you highly to become intimate with your pasture, to walk your pasture before you put any animals in there. What type of grass do you have? If you don't know, call your county extension office. Get a county extension agent to come out and say, this is what you have, here's what's good, here's what's not. A lot of farm stores do this as well. I know our local farm store will come out and say, here's the bad stuff, here's the good stuff, here's what you need to plant. Just because you have a luscious green pasture doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be replanted or reseeded with more nutrient dense grasses or types of pasture. So really, really study your pasture, your setup, your fencing, and your pasture. Because probably your pasture first, because you're not even going to want to waste your time setting anything up on that pasture if you have a lot of amending to do. So checking out that pasture, becoming intimate with it, knowing the ins and outs of it. Not only that, but knowing where holes are, filling holes. Have you ever, do you know cows will just fall into a hole like that? Goats can fall into a hole like that, and then you've got a broken leg, and then you've got a $2,000 vet bill. And getting all of this stuff in order first, so beneficial to you as homesteader. So along with your setup, fencing, pasture, very common sense thing is feed. Do you know the proper type of feed? So here's an example. You know, I know a lot about cows from growing up around them, just doing research on them over the years. But I don't know a lot about bottle baby calves. And so this was my first bottle baby, doing my very first bottle baby on my own. And I got online and I was researching milk replacement. And I'm a big study reader. Okay, I love going to blogs and reading what other people are doing, and I did that too. But I want to know, how does a cow's digestive tract work, and what is the best for this cow? And so what I found was a lot of milk replacers have soy protein instead of a generic animal protein, like a normal milk protein for milk replacer. And so it's true, when I went to Tractor Supply to find a milk replacement for this calf, almost all of them had a soy protein, and there was only like 2 that had a real true milk protein base for this milk replacer. And so I opted for the more expensive milk replacement with milk protein. And had I not done my research, you know, would the calf have been okay with the soy protein replacement? Sure, she probably would have. But what if she wouldn't have? You know, she wouldn't have grown to weight as quickly. She wouldn't have gotten as many nutrients as she should. And just because that doesn't affect her now doesn't mean it won't affect her 6 months from now. And so the same with even smaller livestock. How does their body work? What types of feed options do you have? Are you going to go organic? Are you going to go non-GMO? Are you going to go conventional with just a regular normal feed? If you have goats, you know, what are you feeding them? Do you know how to feed them? Do you know, like with rabbits? An example is with rabbits, baby kits. You know, if you're giving them a large amount of alfalfa-based hay, it has too much calcium in it, and sometimes they can overeat it and it can kill them. So I feel like feed is a really big thing. So have you done your research on feed? It's not as simple as, oh, hey, I'm going to go to Tractor Supply or my farm store and buy a bag of feed. Do your research. Animal feed is a lot like human feed, okay? So we go to the store and we have all these processed options, right? And it's not all good for us. And it's the same with animal feed. So do your research on that. But hand in hand with that is, do you know your animal's digestive tract? So, you know, going back to the pasture, if your cow eats something, do you know how that's digested? Do you know what their poop looks like? Do you know what it's supposed to look like? Okay, because when you're doing animal checks, are you ready for that? Are you ready to follow them around and make sure they're pooping right and make sure they're peeing right? And these are things that homesteaders have to do on a regular basis. Okay, I'm going out into the field, I'm going out to the coop, I'm gonna randomly just look around each day and make sure their poop looks right. And because that is the first way to understand if your animal is healthy. Not the funnest way, but even just glancing and just making sure it looks right. Have you done your research? What does poop look like in a sick cow, or what does poop look like in a sick chicken, or you know, what is it supposed to look like, or what are the warning signs of something? So understand their digestive system, understand their feed requirements, If they're not getting enough nutrients from feed, do you know what their mineral requirements are? These are all things that have to be done in advance, because when an animal gets sick, it's go time. You know, you don't have enough time to really sit and research then. You got to research now. So that's a really great tip before you put that livestock on your property. Along with that tip is, do you understand common ailments in your particular livestock or your particular breed of livestock? This is something I feel like every single livestock owner should know about every type of livestock that they have. If you own chickens, you need to know the most common chicken ailments, what to look for, and how to prevent them and how to treat them should they arise. If you have larger livestock, you should know what are the common ailments of those livestock. What are the symptoms? How is it going to start? What do you look for? When you educate yourself on these common things, you're less likely to have a medical issue emergency arise when you can catch it at the beginning versus once it's gotten really bad. So this is really, really important. I mean, and you can do this part after you get your livestock, but the importance of doing it before you get it is that you know what you're looking for when you're buying something, and you're buying good livestock, good quality livestock stock. And so it's important to know common ailments with all types of livestock before you get them and put them on your property. Furthermore, when you do get new livestock, all of them should be quarantined. Are you ready for that setup of quarantine as well? The next thing that goes really hand in hand with this is a first aid kit. A lot of people will get livestock and think, you know, they don't need a first aid kit. And while some people have livestock and have never had any issue, I would say that's less common than not. You know, what's in your first aid kit? What are you going to have? It depends on your livestock. If you just have poultry, then obviously you just need poultry specific first aid kit. But if you have multiple different animals, goats, cows, an elephant, whatever you have, do you have a first aid kit ready and available right then, right when you need it? Because say you have a large livestock go down and you are there, you're the first line of defense. It's going to take an hour to 2 hours to more for a country vet to get there, a large livestock vet to get there. And what you do in that hour or 2 hours or 5 hours could be potentially life-saving for your livestock. And so having a first aid kit fully stocked all the time is very important. So even before they get there on your property, have that first aid kit done. The next thing is pretty much common sense as to whether you're ready for livestock or not. Are you ready for the time constraints? Now it depends on what you have. You know, chickens don't take up that much time at all. But are you ready for the responsibility that it takes? We actually, with this calf, we did pretty good remembering on the hour to feed her bottle. But we were actually out one night and we just lost track of time. We were in town and we had an appointment and it ran behind, and we just, the daylight, you know, still getting used to daylight savings and everything, and I looked at the clock, and an hour ago we were supposed to feed her and we're 45 minutes away, and I'm like, and that happens. That's real life. That's a real life scenario that can happen, and don't beat yourself up about it. But it didn't happen again. But make sure you're available for the time constraints with livestock. Are you available when your animals get out? Because more than likely they will if you have larger livestock at some point. One of the best quotes that I've heard my whole life from old-time farmers, and even Joel Salatin has said it, if your cows get out, you know, 2 times a year, then it's their fault. If your cows get out 4 times a year, then it's your fault. You're not mending fences properly, or something's going wrong with what you're doing, and then it becomes your issue. So are you ready for that time constraint of mending the fences and checking the fences and feeding the animals and getting up and milking if you have a milk cow, and then being home and milking in the afternoon if you have a dairy goat or whatever? So just make sure, for sure, not that you think you can do it, because you really want to do it, but that you can do it before bringing that animal on your property and then discovering you can't do it and then having to find a new home that might not be as good as yours. The next thing, which probably should have been the first thing on this list, are the laws in your area. What type of laws are there? You know, can you have poultry on your homestead? Even if you have 5 acres, you know, if the county over, I think you can only have 5 hens per acre that you have, and you can't have a rooster. It doesn't matter where you live. It's dependent on your acreage. And so I think you have to have 5 acres before you can have a rooster or something crazy like that. So don't only look at your county laws, but look at your state laws and your subdivision laws if you're in a subdivision. These are all things, you know, I would say 9 times out of 10, a lot of issues that homesteaders run into is that they didn't do their research on property that they've bought, or, you know, if they bought a property, they didn't realize that in the property deed or description that it wasn't zoned for agriculture, and so they couldn't have any type of farm animal on the property over a certain weight, had to get rid of all their animals, their livelihood, and then you're stuck in a situation. Do you sell your house? You know, that's inconvenient for a lot of people. It's inconvenient to just up and sell your house because you have to get rid of your animals. And so these are things to take into consideration, the laws, if you can have livestock. The other thing that's really important, that I feel like not enough people do research on, is what are your waterway laws? So can you have livestock within a certain amount of feet of a stream or a spring or a river? So if you have a river on your property or a stream on your property, you in some states can't have livestock within 60 feet of that stream. And so, okay, well, you've done your fencing and your fencing is all around that stream and they can just wallow in it as much as they want. Well, you're going to get hit with a $2,000 fine. And that's going to be on you because you didn't do your research, and that's going to be on your animals if you have to get rid of them because you're not set up properly. So you see, all this goes in hand. Are you ready for it? Are you ready? Have you done your research? Have you built your fencing the way you should? Do you have the right setup? Do you know the animal inside and out? Do you know how their digestive tract works? Do you know how to have a good first aid kit? Do you know the common health issues? What to look for if you bring home a sick animal, or if the animal is sick a week after you get it or a year after you get it? Are you ready to take on the responsibility of treating that animal for an hour before your vet gets there? Are you available with the time constraints? And after all of that is said and done, after you take into all of this into consideration, the real question is, can you afford it? And we don't like that word. We don't like to think about affording homesteading because it's not cheap at all. And the reality is that, okay, this is a scenario that I've been in. We were thinking about partnering with in-laws on a piece of property years ago, and 15 acres, and we thought, well, in order to keep it in land use, you have to have 5 cows per 10 acres, I think it was, or per 15 acres, I can't remember. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll get a milk cow, and, you know, we'll get some beef cows. At that time, my husband could eat beef. He can't anymore because of Lyme's disease. But I would get a milk cow. And so I did my research, you know, how does the cow work? I decided, oh, I would do a calf share, you know, so I'm not getting 20 million gallons of milk every day. You know, I would have the calf on mama during the day, separate them at night, milk in the morning, be done with it. That would be easier for me. But I'm looking at spending $1,200 to $2,000 for a cow. That was the first thing. The second thing was, am I going to hand milk, or do I want a milker? You can get a milker between $500 and $1,200 at some, and they go up from there. Where's my hay coming from? I've got to buy hay because I don't have my own pasture to make hay. So can I find a reliable hay source? Is it good? Is it good hay? How much is it going to cost me? Where am I going to store it? Which, that was easy because there was a barn on the property. But how am I going to haul it? I don't have a trailer. Here I am thinking about getting a cow, and I don't even have a trailer. We had that baby calf just a few weeks ago, and we didn't have a trailer. We had to borrow a trailer for it. You know, so if I'm going to get into large livestock, I'm probably going to need a trailer. You know, instead of bothering people with keeping on borrowing trailers. You know, if I have a cow that's sick and I've got to take it to the vet, I need a trailer. You know, what happens if the cow can't calve properly and I either lose the calf, so that's money out of my pocket, or I've got to call the vet out, and that's another $2,000 vet bill. What about grain? You know, what about fixing the structures? You know, structures don't last forever. They have to be fixed. And I started adding all this up and thinking, well, good grief. I've got like $10,000 in this cow, and I haven't even bought the thing yet. And so, you know, again, we're looking at larger livestock, because the larger livestock, the more expensive. But chickens can be expensive too. You know, we built our coop ourselves. It's an 8x8 coop. And because we built it ourselves, it costs less. And so it only cost us about $800 to build it with the materials that we had bought. But it took time, and that's $800. And over the years, how much money have I spent on chickens? Different breeds that I wanted, different breeding programs that I was doing, feed costs. At Homesteaders of America, we have a pretty awesome handy dandy homestead management printable where you can actually break down all of this cost. Very efficient. I did actually find that I was not spending as much money as I thought I was on my chickens. I was actually saving money by not buying eggs at the grocery store, raising my own chickens. And I know that seems impossible, but it's not at all, depending on how many chickens you have. And so go check out those printables if you haven't already. But, you know, it's just with anything. Hutches, even just with rabbits, they cost money. Gardening, getting your garden set up costs money. But we're specifically talking about livestock. So after all of this is taken into consideration, your setup, your pasture, your tools, your first aid kit, knowing their digestive tract, knowing common ailments, fencing, feed, time constraints, maintenance, laws, can you afford it? Because it would be bad to come down to a winter where you run out of hay and you can't find it, or you weren't prepared for it, and then you're paying out the wazoo for it, or you have a vet bill that you can't pay, and your animals suffer because you weren't ready. And ultimately, that's what it boils down to. Now, let me just stress that there are incidences that happen that are outside of your control. They happen to every single homesteader. Animals get sick. Animals hurt themselves. I mean, come on, they're outside all day long without supervision. You're not their mother. You know, these things happen. Predator attacks happen. You learn from them. You as homesteader adapt to them. But are you ready to do that? So after all of this is said and done, and after all of this has been taken into consideration, are you really ready for livestock on your homestead? And like I said, it's not as in-depth and dramatic if you're just getting 6 chickens and a duck and a turkey. You know, it's not even always as dramatic just getting 2 goats, you know. But when you start really growing your homestead and you really start bringing animals on, these are things that people don't think about, especially the pasture, especially knowing ailments, especially knowing your animal's digestive tract. You essentially have to become a mini vet for your animal, because I'm not taking my chicken to the vet, you know, and I've never had to. But my larger livestock might have to, but I want to avoid that if I can. And I can is the thing. If I educate myself and research and have my entire property sustainably ready and intimately ready for that livestock. My grass is good. I don't have toxic grasses on my property. My setup is good. My animals aren't hurting themselves because I've let stuff go. My fencing is good. I'm away from the water source so that I'm not going to get fined $1 million from my county. You know, once all of this is in place, and it seems like a lot, and it can be a lot, but wouldn't we rather do all of this stuff before, and then once you bring that animal or those animals onto your homestead, you know without a shadow of a doubt you're ready. And that is where the romanticism of homesteading comes in. You can sit down, you can enjoy watching that herd of cattle in your front pasture. You can enjoy watching your milk cow run and play in a field. You can enjoy that milk cow, that morning milking, even though you're tired and your hands hurt. Even in those hardships, you know that everything else is taken care of. Everything else is done because you did your research and you took care of it long ago. And those hardships become blessings because, you know what, your hands hurt, but you're getting fresh milk from your cow. You're tired, but you're making cheese and butter for your family. You might be sick one day, but that warm egg in your hand or in your pocket is going to feed and sustain your family for another day. You are tired of smelling poop and cleaning your house from the poop that comes in on dirty little shoes or your husband's shoes or your shoes, but you know what? You have a roof over your head. Your animals are safe. Your animals are healthy, and you are aware of everything that's going on and running like clockwork on your homestead. So I feel like it's worth it in the long run. A lot of work now for little work later, and the romantic part of homesteading later. So I hope you enjoyed this homestead chat. It's a lengthy one. I don't know that all of our homestead chats will be this lengthy, but I feel like it's important. Treat it more like a podcast instead of a quick video. But these are things that every homesteader needs to think about before adding livestock. And they're questions that you need to ask. Am I really ready? And if you can say yes to all of this, all of it, not just 3 of them, but all of it, then you're ready for livestock on your homestead. And I wish you the best because it is the best experience ever. It really is, and it's so fun, especially when you start getting into larger livestock and larger animals, and they're like big giant puppy dogs. They're larger, the bills are larger, your love is larger, but they produce more for you, and they're just amazing creatures to have on your homestead. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time on the Homestead Chat, happy homesteading.